So thank you, everyone. I want to start off by saying there are a lot of heroes in this room for me. Journalists who are doing the hard work of telling the stories of our society, librarians who are creating meeting grounds for that society to come together and to learn together, foundations that are working in this complicated space that I've frankly come to think of as the whole Knight package. You know, the package that the Knight Foundation has put together around libraries and information and media and journalism and engaged community. And so I want to thank all of you in this room who are doing this work, and I especially want to single out Alberto before I forget and the Knight Foundation, if you would give them a round of applause. Now, I partly did that because I'm going to, in my remarks, refer to the whole Knight package in kind of a fuzzy way, and I want you to know that what I'm talking about is all of the things that are embodied in that. And I apologize in advance. I just got back from Australia, and if it appears that I am jet-lagged, I am. Worse than I've ever had in my life. This is the first time I've been back to Australia since I was 10 years old. So do the math, it's a long time. I was born there in Adelaide, Australia, and everybody tells me I would be a whole lot cooler if I still had the accent, which I really got when I was there. But what I had on this trip was the opportunity to meet a whole bunch of family that I never knew, and in particular to meet a friend of my dad's who worked with him back when he started his career, and he told me a story that I've got to share with this audience. So he told me a story about my dad when he was just starting out as an apprentice cartoonist, and he was 19 years old. He was working at his very first newspaper, and within the smallest amount of time imaginable, managed to get into an argument with his boss. And it must have been a doozy of an argument, because his boss declared that no Oliphant cartoon would ever again appear in any publication that he controlled. And what I love about that story is that that boss was Rupert Murdoch. And this may be apropos of nothing, but it's a great story. But it also at least tells you something, that it is possible to speak truth to power and survive. And that's a little bit of the theme of what I want to address with you today. I want to start off by looking at Pittsburgh. I want to talk about the trends that I see happening in other communities like us all around the country, and then how I think the work we're talking about here comes into play in responding to that. Really, think of this conversation as about purpose. Why are we here having the complicated conversations, and if you listen to Dana's presentation this morning, the kind of scary conversations that we're having? What is the purpose that we're trying to fulfill by doing this work? So let me start with Pittsburgh. In the last 2 or 3 years, it has felt to me at times like Pittsburgh is at this weird, eerie vortex of cosmic relevance in our country. A bizarre set of things that has happened in the community, and just to offer up a few, in the midst of the campaign and presidential rhetoric about enemies of the people with regard to journalists, the publisher of our largest daily decides to fire on the president's birthday the paper's celebrated editorial cartoonist, Rob Rogers. I took that one kind of personally. In the midst of the debate about climate change denial and the relevance of climate change on the national scene, the president decides to declare himself president of Pittsburgh, not Paris. In the midst of America's broken conversation about race, a Pittsburgh artist named Alicia Wormsley puts up an exhibit on a sign in the middle of one of the city's urban neighborhoods that says the following: there are black people in the future. That sign was ordered to be taken down by the person who controlled the billboard because of pressure that she said she got from the community for a message that she said was political in nature. Grantees in numbers too numerous for me to count have come to this foundation and told us stories about exhibits that they are not allowed to stage in their museums, conversations they are not allowed to have with their constituents, parades that they are not allowed to march in because of boards who are concerned that the values expressed through those are partisan. In the midst of a national debate about police violence, a young man named Antoine Rose Jr., a teen in high school, is gunned down, shot 3 times in the back as he fled a police stop. And in the midst of a national conversation about hate speech and the price of violent rhetoric and the growing threat from white supremacy, a gunman walks into a synagogue 3 blocks from my house and murders 11 people because he believes that they are aiding and abetting a swarm of immigrants crossing the border. But as I've thought about this, and as I've talked to constituents around the country about how I feel about what's happening in Pittsburgh, what I hear over and over and over again is, it ain't just you. The stories are similar across the country. And what I have observed in the conversations that I've had with others and in our own community is that we are feeling our communities, the places where we work, begin to fracture because of 7 toxins that are threatening not only the future of community, but the future of civil society. I've identified 7. I'm sure there are more. And in some ways, they're the things we talk about all the time, but it's important to put them on the table when you think about the tensions and stressors that community is facing in America today. One, and an old one, the granddaddy of them all, is discrimination. And this is simply racism, sexism, the historical and current patterns of inequity that continue to divide our society that we have not settled for centuries and decades, and that are suddenly relevant in new ways. The second is alienation. And this is the sense that some people have of, I am being left behind. And not just that, but unworthy others are getting ahead at my expense. The third is fragmentation, which is simply the retreat into communities of identity. It's everything that this morning's presentation pointed to. The fourth is demonization. And this is all about the language we use of how we look at each other. And it's the language of the enemy within. It manifests on T-shirts that say things like, I'd rather be Russian than Democrat. It manifests in language like, we are currently seeing that America is on the cusp of a new civil war. The fifth is about information, disinformation, and misinformation. And I think we need to coin a new term, which is dismisinformation. Hannah Arendt had this brilliant notion that I think about a lot in the context of this work. She said that if everybody always lies to you, the result is not that you believe the lie. The result is that you never believe anything again. And in that kind of context, you choose to believe what you want to believe. The sixth factor or toxin poisoning civil society in America today is politicization. This one is especially toxic to those of us who work in the civic sector. This is the thing that says everything is political. So if you want to march in the Pride Parade, actual case in my community, you can't do that under the banner of your organization because that might be construed as political. You want to host an exhibit on race, you can't do that because it's political. You want to have a sign that makes the really apparently controversial statement that there are black people in the future, you can't do that because it's political. When everything becomes political, including the core values of the civic sector, it raises the question of how we operate at all. And the seventh is resignation. In the context of not knowing where to get your information, not knowing whom to trust, not knowing who's on your side, not having common meeting grounds for people, people do begin to lose faith in the actual possibility of change. Yale University recently did a study on climate change around this, and they noted that for the first time in years, the optimism among the public about the possibility of doing something on climate change was going down. And here's what a colleague of mine said to me in the context of this. He said, when people lose hope, they lose. And the question is, how do we avoid that?